fourth in a series of webinars on Hilchos Brochos with Rabbi Dovid Heber. My name is Rabbi Goldberg, and I'm glad to host this program. Today we're going to discuss, Rabbi Heber will discuss the halachos of Hamotzi. What does, when you wash for Hamotzi, what does that cover in your meal? The appetizers, the desserts, and so on. What exactly does it cover and what doesn't it cover? If you'd like to join the voice program by phone, you can dial 218-895-1203, 218-895-1203, passcode 2020. This coming Wednesday, we have our regular series webinar series, the end of the month, every Wednesday at noon, the last Wednesday of the month. And this week we'll be having on Rabbi Kurzfeld, who's going to discuss what it takes to do a catering on your own, sort of without a mashgiach, or is that a good idea? Sometimes people have a kiddush or an affair on Shabbos, and they want to run it with just a caterer. And what are the pitfalls and what are the things that you need to be aware of if you're going to do that? So that's this Wednesday at noon, and we'll send you out a reminder of how you can access that. And the next class with Rabbi Heber is tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from today. If there's any change, again, we'll let you know via email. If you have any questions that the Star K can assist you with in Kashrus or in any area of halacha, please call us at 410-484-4110 or info@star-k.org. Rabbi Heber.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Goldberg. This afternoon, we're going to speak about the halachos of when a person recites a Hamotzi. What are the various halachos? As is well known from early childhood, when a person recites a Hamotzi, the rest of the meal, or most of the rest of the meal, is covered. In other words, if a person does not make Hamotzi at a meal, you have to make a brocha on all the various items unless you have an ikar and tafel. So for example, if you sit down and you don't make Hamotzi, if you had potatoes and rice and chicken, let's say, you would make a mezainis on the rice, you'd make a hadam on the potatoes, you'd make a shahakal on the chicken. But if, let's say, before you began that meal, you made Hamotzi, you washed, then the halacha is you would not have to make a bracha on any of those. The Hamotzi covers that entire meal. So again, that's the basic halacha. What we want to discuss this afternoon is, number one, the lomdus, the rationale of this halacha. Well, how does it work? What's the background? And number two is, what are the exceptions to this rule? Because the following statement is not true, that the Hamotzi will cover everything from beginning to end. As we will see, there are different items that it does not cover, and it's important to know exactly how this works. The lomdus of this, that Hamotzi covers the entire meal, is ikar and tafel. As we learned earlier, when you have a mixture of different foods, you make a bracha on the ikar, and it patters, it exempts the tafel. A person eats a piece of cake, and there's frosting on the cake. You make a mezainis on the cake. You do not need a shahakal. In fact, you're not allowed to make a shahakal on the frosting because it's tafel. It's been covered by the mezainis that you recited on the cake. That's the halacha. By Hamotzi, we extend that halacha of ikar and tafel, and we say when a person makes a Hamotzi on the bread, the rest of the meal is tafel, is secondary to the bread, even though you're not eating it with the bread. In other words, it goes without saying that if you spread peanut butter onto a slice of bread, you don't need a separate bracha on the peanut butter, no different than the frosting on the cake. That's certainly a classic example of a tafel, of a secondary ingredient. But even further, if you made Hamotzi at the beginning of the meal and now you're serving chicken, you're not even eating the chicken together with the bread, or you're eating potatoes, or Shabbos you had gefilte fish and you had chicken soup and you had cholent and kugel and salad, all of those items are tafel, are secondary to the bread, even though you ate your piece of challah. Halachas Shabbos, a person l'chadchila ideally is supposed to eat a kapeya v'yoser, which means more than a kapeya, more than 2 kazesim, which would be approximately the size of 2 golf balls. So once you've done that, you're yoytze to Shabbos. And if you ate that at the beginning of the meal, you're in b'diavad, it's enough to even eat 1 kazayas. You could have that at the beginning of the meal after you make Hamotzi, And now you won't see any more challah, and you'll just eat your cholent and so on. You don't need any bracha on those items, because these items are considered tafel, secondary to the bread, even though they're not eaten with the bread. However, Chazal tell us that only works on dvarim habaim machbas hasuda, which means they're items that come because of the meal. They are meal type of items. And from that terminology of Chazal, we see, and they themselves say, that it's dvarim habaim, if they are dvarim habaim shaloi machbas hasuda, which means they are items that are not eaten as part of a meal. They're typically not eaten together with bread or at a meal with bread. They're independently eaten typically, and you decide to interject those items into the middle of the meal. They are no longer tafel, and therefore the halacha is one would have to make a bracha on such an item. That's the general klal. Let's go through some examples now. The typical entree, main course, side dish, and beverages are all included in Dvarim Haba Machmas Hasuda, and you don't have to make a bracha on those items. However, a raw fruit is considered Dvarim Habaim Shaloi Machmas Hasuda. People typically don't eat raw fruit during a meal. So let's say in the middle of let's use a Shabbos meal for example, because that's typically when one washes. You decide in the middle of your Shabbos meal, you go to the refrigerator, you pull out an apple, and you eat the apple. So the halacha is that apple requires a bar pria eitz. Now you don't need a bracha chorayna on the apple. It's going to be included in your birchas hamazon, but as far as a bracha rishayna, it's considered independent, and therefore in the middle of your meal you're going to make a bar pria eitz on this apple, because the apple is dvar mabayim shalei machmas hasuda, and therefore it requires its own bracha. And that's more nagay than Shabbos. It's not typical people walk over into the fridge and take out an apple, but it could be relevant to your lunch that maybe you're eating as you hear the shir. And that is, if you have a bag lunch with a tuna fish sandwich, and let's say some carrot sticks, and an apple. So most people will eat the tuna fish sandwich, and perhaps they'll eat the carrots or cucumbers together while they're eating the sandwich. And even if not, they're considered dvar mabayim machmas hasuda. They're a vegetable, and that's typically eaten with the meal, and therefore you do not require another bracha. So if you're sitting there eating your tuna fish sandwich together with a bag of cucumbers and carrots, or the lettuce and tomatoes, you don't require a separate bracha, because they're dvar mabayim machmas hasuda, they're part of the meal. However, if you have an apple, so certainly if you ate that apple for dessert, you're going to need a bracha. We're going to talk about desserts a little bit later. But even if I ate the apple in the middle of the meal, so you ate, let's say you have a tuna fish sandwich and you have two halves, and you ate the first half of the sandwich, now you say, let me try that apple. And you eat the apple, and then you eat the second half of the tuna sandwich, or you ate the second tuna sandwich, then the halacha is you need a bar pria eitz on the apple, because it's dvar mabayim machmas, it's part of the category of dvar mabayim shalei machmas hasuda, and therefore the halacha is one would require its own independent and separate bracha. Now, there's an exception to this rule, and that is exception to this exception, and that is if a person for the vorspeis, for the appetizer, they ate a fruit cup, there is a suffix in halacha whether or not it requires its own bracha. Because on one hand, we could say it's raw fruit, and this is very common. You'll come to, let's say, a sheva brochos, or some other catered meal, or fancy meal, or large meal, and you'll sit down, and sitting on your plate, there's a fruit cup, and in that fruit cup there are fruits. So let's assume they are bar pria eitz. You have pineapple, you have apples and oranges and some grapes in this cup. We learned earlier in a shir, let's say you had some pineapples in there, you would go ikar, you would define what the ikar is. Let's say it was primarily eitz fruits, you make a bar pria eitz, but it really doesn't make a difference. Even if the vorspeis is watermelon, which is also in this case, even though it's a bar pria adama, we consider it as an appetizer, and we consider it as a fruit. As far as our purposes are concerned, people typically don't eat watermelon during the course of the meal. The halacha is that one would not have to say a bracha on the vorspeis on the raw fruit. This is a suffix in halacha, it's a machlokes, suffix brachas lahakol. If a person ate from that fruit before the meal, that would be ideal. In this case, usually we tell people don't eat before the meal, because it's a bracha shenet tzricha, but over here it might be ideal to make the bar pria eitz before you make hamotzi, to be yaitse for sure the bracha. But if you did it, and then typically people might be uncomfortable all of a sudden picking at the fruit cup before they even sat down, before they even washed, I made Hamotzi. So in that case, when you make the Hamotzi, now you're looking at this fruit cup. You do not require a brocha on that fruit cup because of the suffix brochos. Again, what's the suffix? On one hand, it is a fruit, so it's it's not part of the meal, and therefore it needs its own bar pri'aitz. On the other hand, a four-spice, a appetizer, is really part of the meal because it's, as the name indicates, it's an appetizer. It's there to whet your appetite. When someone begins eating something, they all of a sudden get a bigger appetite, and it helps the meal itself. And therefore, some say it is dvar mabay machmas hasuda because it's servicing the meal. In other words, if you eat an apple in the middle of the meal, it serves no purpose. It's an independent entity, requires its own bracha. But if for the appetizer, for the four-spice, you pick up the fruit, or you have the fruit cup and you begin to eat it, there are those that say that's really part of the meal. It's the entree. It's the not the entree. It's the entrance into the meal. It's the appetizer, and therefore one would not require a bracha because it's considered dvar mabay machmas hasuda. Suffix brochos lahakol, which means when in doubt we say don't make a bracha. Eat the fruit cup without a bracha. But if you eat that fruit cup any other time during the meal, in the middle of the meal, or even for dessert, as we will see, one would have to recite a bracha. Another example of dvar mabay machmas hasuda is wine. If a person drinks wine during the meal, the halacha is it requires its own bracha, a bar pri'agafen, or for that matter, grape juice. Because even though wine is typically, people do drink wine during the course of a meal, but we do not allow the Hamotzi to pater, to exempt the bar pri'agafen. The bar pri'agafen has its own chshivas, and therefore we do not say that the wine is pater. Now, that's the only beverage, wine and grape juice. If a person drinks water, orange juice, apple juice, soda, fruit juice, or some other item during the course of the meal, the halacha is it's patered by the Hamotzi because it's dvar mabay machmas hasuda. People, when you eat a meal, you can't just eat the meal, you need to drink with it, and therefore that's considered part of the meal, and one would not recite a bracha. But if you drink wine during the meal, you need a bracha. Now, what happens Friday night or Shabbos morning? Do you require a bar pri'agafen in this case? Because you began your meal, when you say began your meal, the first thing you do Friday night or Shabbos morning is you recite Kiddush, and when you recite Kiddush, you drink wine. Does the bar pri'agafen before the meal exempt the wine during the meal? So the answer is as follows. If you drank wine or grape juice before the meal, then it will exempt the wine or grape juice during the meal. However, if you did not drink wine or grape juice before the meal, you only heard the Kiddush, then it does not pater, it does not exempt the wine during the meal. So let's give some examples. Friday night I make Kiddush, and I drink the wine. So then I go and I make Hamotzi, I go wash, make Hamotzi, and now, let's say during the course of the meal, I decide that I want to go ahead and drink some more of the wine. I have, let's say, wine in my becher, and I want to drink that wine. Now, at a later shir, in fact, in the next shir, Mitzvah Shem, which will be the shir before Purim, we will discuss if you drink a second, different type of wine, the halachos of the brocha of hatayva hametiv. But we're not talking about that. That's a separate halacha. We're talking about where I had wine and I drink the same wine. Like I say, I had a becher. I drank from I poured out some for everybody at the table. I drank from the becher, and sitting on the table is the wine. Now we eat the filter fish, and now I want to drink some wine after the fish. I do not need to make a bar pri'agafen because I made a bar pri'agafen before the meal started, when I made Kiddush, when I recited Kiddush. I drank the wine. That exempts me on any wine that I will drink or grape juice all the way through Hilchos Hamazon. Again, besides that type of meitav issue, if I bring out a different wine. But if I want to drink something, and right now, let's say that same wine, or under certain conditions, different wine, as we will see, when we learn Hatayv HaMeitiv, it will exempt it, and therefore I do not require another bracha on that wine because I already drank the wine. However, and the same is true with my family at the table, where we will go ahead and everyone gets a little cup of wine, and everybody drinks from that wine, and now during the course of the meal, they decide they want to drink more wine or grape juice. Let's say the grape juice was on the table, which it was there, and so there's not a type of meitav issue, and now the wine exempted all the wine and grape juice sitting on the table, and now they want to drink grape juice during the course of the meal. A new bar pri'agafen is not required because it was exempted with the bar pri'agafen at the beginning of the meal. In other words, the Hamotzi does not terminate the koyach, the strength of the original hagafen. That hagafen remains in place, intact, all the way up until I bench. However, let's say a person did not drink wine. A person did not feel up to drinking wine, or they're not interested in drinking the wine. So they're Yotze Kiddush. To be Yotze Kiddush, you don't have to actually drink. If you're a listener of the Kiddush, you do not have to drink from that wine. There are certain conditions, even the Mekadesh could give away the wine and let others drink if he doesn't feel well. That's a halacha in Hilchos Kiddush. But let's give a more practical example. I recite Kiddush. There are people at my Shabbos table, and one person says, I don't want to drink any wine. So that person is Yotze Kiddush. I had kavanah to be mitzi them. They had kavanah to be Yotze. They will then eat a Suda. You need Kiddush Malkum Suda. I eat a Suda. They eat a Suda. I'm Yotze Kiddush and Suda Shabbos. They're Yotze Kiddush and Suda Shabbos. Even though they didn't drink any wine, you don't need to drink wine to be Yotze Kiddush. You need to hear Kiddush. You need to have kavanah to be Yotze, and the person reciting the Kiddush needs to have kavanah to be mitzi you. Now, this person was Yotze Kiddush, but he was not Yotze Bar Perak Ofen, in the sense that if during the meal, let's say, he wants to now drink some grape juice, after we make Hamotzi, he now says, pass the grape juice, I want to drink some. Let's say it's one of the children, they want to now drink grape juice, they have to recite a Bar Perak Ofen, because the Bar Perak Ofen that I said in Kiddush, that didn't work for them, because they never drank any wine at the time. And the Hamotzi that was recited, that's not going to work either, because grape juice and wine are considered Dvar Mabayim Shaloi Machmas Asura. They require their own Bar Pri Hagafen. And therefore, they, in that case, would have to pick up a cup of grape juice and recite a Bar Pri Hagafen in order to be Yotze. We hold that Schnapps is Dvar Mabayim Machmas Asura, and a brocha is not required. So it's only wine and grape juice that is necessary, that one is required to recite a Bar Pri Hagafen on during the course of the meal. Now, another example of Dvar Mabam Shalem Machmas Hasuda includes items that are typically not eaten during a meal, like ice cream, or candy, or sherbet. Those are items, candy is not something typically eaten during a meal. You take a chocolate bar and you eat it, or some jelly beans, and you're eating that, or ice cream, or ices. Again, we're talking obviously if you were milking, it was a milk meal. Then the halacha is you're allowed to do this. There's no prohibition from eating these items. It's just they're not typical items eaten during the course of a meal. Then, in that such a case, halacha is a brocha has to be recited because they are dvar mabon machmas asura. Now, another discussion, a detailed discussion, are the halachas of dessert. And the general rule, this is a machlekes, dessert of course is what's eaten at the end of the meal after you've eaten your main course, and now dessert is served, particularly Shabbos people eat, or by a Shabbat Brochos, or even some people during the week will eat dessert at a meal. The halacha is, dessert is considered, most poskim are of the opinion that dessert is considered a separate entity, and therefore with one exception, which we'll mention in a moment, dessert requires its own brocha, whatever the dessert might be. If it's ice cream or ices or candy, some sort of candy item, or fruit, or a melon, all of those dessert is a separate entity, and it requires its own independent bracha. Under most conditions, Brochos Hamotzi will cover dessert. So again, we're only talking about now reciting a bracha rishona on this dessert. Now there's an exception to this, and that is pas haba b'kisnin, items which fall into the category of pas haba b'kisnin. A classic example of that would be cake, is something that is exempted by the Hamotzi even when it's eaten for dessert. And let's define pas haba b'kisnin briefly, and then explain why this is an exception to the rule. Pas haba b'kisnin are items that are similar to bread, but do not exactly meet the criteria of bread. It includes three categories. It includes items that have been that the dough, the taste of the dough, has been transformed based on the addition of other ingredients. A classic example of this would be cake, which has been the dough has changed its time, its taste. Now instead of tasting like a bread, it's much sweeter, and therefore it tastes like cake, or even cocoa or chocolate cake. You've transformed the taste of the dough, and it's different. In other words, if you have challah, we had a little sugar sweetened the challah, it's still a hamotzi. But here you change the whole mahus, the whole nature of the dough has changed, and therefore the brocha is a bar bina mizaynis, unless you kaveh a suda on it, unless you make it into a meal, which is really beyond the scope of our discussion at this point. Another example is something which is filled with fruit. That's actually the literal translation of pas habo'a bekisnin. Bekisnin is a pocket, so within the pocket of this dough, there's fruit, an apple turnover, for example, would fit into that category. And the last category, pas habo'a bekisnin, would be something which is a hard and brittle item. So for example, that is made with flour and water. A classic example of that would be a pretzel. A regular, good old-fashioned hard pretzel is flour and water, so it should be a bread, but since it's baked into a hard, brittle substance, it no longer is considered a bread, it's considered possible bekisnin, and therefore again the brocha is a mezainis. You don't have to wash on it, you don't have to bench on it, unless you are kaveh suda, unless you make it into a meal. Now, let's talk about dessert. The reason why, if you eat any of the above, if you ate the cake, or you ate cookies for dessert, you do not need a bracha, a new bracha, for the following reason. Let's say, for dessert, you decided to eat matzah for dessert. Now matzah is hamotzi. And you sweeten the matzah a little bit. You added some jam onto the matzah. And that's your dessert. In other words, you had a regular meal, and now for dessert, you like sweet matzah. So you put some jelly on it. Would you need to make a hamotzi on that matzah? Of course not. Because forget about the halachos of pas covers all the items during the meal. You don't need a hamotzi on the matzah because at the beginning of the meal, you already made a hamotzi. So it certainly covers all the hamotzis, not because of ikar and tafel, of everything we've been speaking about, of bread, taking care of the cholent and the kugel and the chicken soup and so on. It covers it because it's another type of bread. And therefore, if you make hamotzi on rolls and you take out slices of bread during the meal, you don't need another hamotzi because you made hamotzi already. It's similar to, let's say you sit down to eat a meal, you don't wash, you don't make hamotzi, and you're served a bowl of vegetable soup, and the brocha is hadama. And now, during the meal, they serve you peas and carrots. Do you make a hadama on the peas and carrots? No, you made a hadama at the beginning of the meal. And then, for dessert, they serve you watermelon. Do you need a hadama on the watermelon? No, because I made a hadama at the beginning of this meal, and it covers the entire meal. So, I don't need, I have 3 different hadamas. I don't, until I make a bar nefashos, or until I'm a siach das, which means I say I'm finished, this original hadama on the vorspeise, on the bowl of vegetable soup, will take care of the entire meal. So I don't need any new brachas. That's pashut. I make hadama, it lasts all the way through. So same thing here. If I make a hamotzi at the beginning of the meal, it lasts all the way through. So if I have jam and matzah for dessert, it's going to cover it because I made hamotzi. Hamotzi lasts all the way through. Pas habo'a bekisnin is suffix. It's considered a suffix in halacha, and it's a suffix whether we consider it bread and it needs a hamotzi, or we consider it a mezainis. Suffix brochos l'chakol typically is implemented to say, don't worry about washing on this. Suffix l'chakol. Don't make a hamotzi. Don't bench on this item. And alamichi suffices because suffix brochos l'chakol. You don't have to make the long extended brocha on eating a piece of cake because suffix brochos l'chakol. Well, we could take that same suffix brachas and flip it the other way and say maybe the bracha on this item is really a hamotzi. In other words, cake is a suffix mezainis, suffix hamotzi. On the side, on the tzad, that it's a hamotzi, my original hamotzi at the beginning of the meal exempted all hamotzis. As we said, if in the middle of the meal, if you made hamotzi on a roll, and in the middle of the meal you eat pita, and then you eat bread, and you eat matzah, you don't need another bracha. I made hamotzi, and for dessert I ate matzah and jelly, I don't need hamotzi either because I already made hamotzi at the beginning of the meal, and therefore that hamotzi will exempt all the hamotzis. So mitzafek, from the angle of a doubt, the halacha is that original hamotzi mitzafek will exempt, will pater all of the hamotzis that I eat, even the suffix hamotzis. So therefore, if I eat a piece of cake at the end of the meal, it's exempted misafek with the original hamotzi, and that's why the exception of the rule is that hamotzi will not cover any dessert with the exception of something which is possible bekistin in a case where it's a suffix, so to speak, where it meets one of these three conditions, and therefore I do not need to make a bracha on the cake. Now, that should not be confused with the following. The following statement is false. It's partially false, which makes it false, and that is, if I have mezainis for dessert, I don't have to make a bracha on that item. Now, the reason why it's a false statement is you could have, let's say, Rice Krispie treats. Rice Krispie treats are mezainis, because we make a mezainis on rice products. Rice Krispie treats, again, when you mixed it with peanut butter or fluff or other types of items, now the bracha is a mezainis, you serve it for dessert. So you need to make a mezainis on that item, because Rice Krispie treats are not a pasuk bekistin. They are a mezainis, because rice, we're not going to make a mezainis, but they are not pasuk bekistin, and therefore they're no different than a fruit or a piece of watermelon, where I need, or candy or ice cream, which requires a bracha, because they're not pater by the Hamotzi. So that's why I go back to the statement to say that the Hamotzi will pater all desserts that are mezainis is usually true, because most mezainis that you have for dessert are pasuk bekistin. You're eating a piece of cake or and so on, then it will pater it. But if it's a Rice Krispie item or another type of pasuk bekistin, a non-pasuk bekistin, or if you could come up even with something known as a maisa kedera, which would mean a bowl of oatmeal is a maisa kedera. You don't really have oatmeal for dessert, but if you had some sort of oat cooked product that's not a pasuk bekistin, then the halacha is one would require a bracha on such a dessert. Now, it will exempt Hamotzi, will exempt the following, okay, as we said, the basic part of the meal, and as follows. If, let's say, you have a cooked fruit that's eaten as part of a meal, or you could even have a case of a raw fruit. They talk about Waldorf salad. A Waldorf salad is something which is typically eaten during the course of a meal, or most cooked fruit that's not eaten as a dessert type of form. Some people will serve baked apples as part of a meal, or apple cobbler, or cranberry sauce. These are eaten typically during the course of the meal. In fact, very often they're coming as a tuffle to one of the courses on the meal. Cranberry sauce is very good with chicken or turkey. So the cranberry sauce is considered dvar mabah machmas hasuda because they're there as a relish for the main course, which in itself is tuffle to the Hamotzi. So if you're eating a fruit or even applesauce and latkes, let's say you serve the applesauce and it's eaten, it's typically a tuffle. It's a relish to the rest of your main course. So now we say that you don't make a bracha, because here's how it works. It's a domino effect. I have my Hamotzi, my chicken or my turkey is tuffled to the bread. It's dvar mabah machmas hasuda, and anything that's used to enhance the taste of the turkey. So cranberry sauce goes well with turkey. Latkes are dvar mabah machmas hasuda. The applesauce, which is enhancing my latke, is also dvar mabah machmas hasuda, and therefore one would not require bracha on such an item, because it's typically it's dvar mabah machmas hasuda. It's typically eaten during the course of a meal. If a person eats their meal is a fruit plate. So this is a suffix in halacha. The case is as follows. Let's say your entire meal is fruit. Till now we're talking about you had a fruit for dessert, you decided to eat an apple in the middle of the meal, you had a Vorspice, right? Your appetizer was fruit. So we have all these issues that we dealt with in the shir. What happens if my whole meal is fruit? I'm going to make Hamotzi, and unless this happens, we send mashkichim. Star case sends mashkichim all over the world, and sometimes the question is, what do they eat for a meal? Especially Shabbos, they have to eat a suda, and they may be in a far-flung location that certainly they don't have access to kosher meat. They can't have their Shabbos cholent. If they're lucky, they may be going to bring in a jar of gefilte fish or the tuna fish or salmon or something that they can take along. But let's say it's a case that's a long trip and they depleted their stock, or they didn't let it in. They stopped it at the border patrol, or at once I've gotten stopped with cans of salmon because it was too much liquid in a foreign airport. They said it's too much liquid, can't take it. So that's it, you're stuck. So what's their suda? So they have their loaves of bread or their box of matzahs, and that's going to be their lechem mishnah. And their meal, they go out to the fruit market on Friday, and that's, of course, kosher. They're in China or Taiwan or South Korea, and now they have to come up with a meal. So they'll buy fruit, and they'll buy fruits and vegetables, and they'll come back to their hotel room, and they'll cut them up, and they'll wash them and cut them up. And now this is their Suda Shabbos. Fruit, beautiful fruit plate, and that's going to be their Suda Shabbos. Do you make a bracha on those fruits or not? On one hand, one could say, we just said the fruit is not, it's not part of the meal. But over here, this is their meal. Their meal is fruit. What's the halacha? So it's a suffix in halacha, and in this case, they say it's the best is to begin the meal with a little bit of bread. And maybe even muhudadik to end the meal with a little bit of bread, if possible, but it really is enough to begin. And that is when you make the Hamotzi, you'll eat your bread from your lechem mishnah, and then when you start eating the fruit, you put a little bit of fruit on the bread, and that shows that it's now toughl to now part of the meal, because I'm eating it a little bit, even though people typically don't put apples onto bread, but you begin the meal by doing that, and even more important as well, end the meal if possible, then you've incorporated this fruit into the meal, and therefore the halacha is one would not require a bracha, really be suffix, and you're just ensuring that another step to show that it's part of the meal, and therefore you don't need a bracha. But one should not do this if they ate an apple during the meal. If you're eating a tuna fish sandwich for lunch, to take the apple and the tuna fish sandwich and eat a little bit at the beginning, that's not really enough to do that. The case here is where your whole meal was the fruit, as we gave our example, our Starkei Mashkiach, making sure that the Kashrus is being implemented in a proper manner in the distant locations where food is produced, and of course you could have a businessman or other people who are traveling in areas where they have a fruit plate, or one kind of a fruit plate for many other reasons, for health considerations and so on. Then this would be the halacha. They should begin the meal with the bread, and that will make the halacha that a separate bracha on the fruit is not necessary. And certainly, as we said, Brochos Hamotzi will pater the entire meal in all of the above cases. And again, there are certain exceptions, possibly where if one's at a fancy chasana and tables are cleared and reset and dessert is served, there are sveikas in such a case whether or not even a bracha achrayna is required under certain conditions. One should ask a shaila in that case when one is at such a chasana where that happens. And there's also another shaila, as we mentioned, with mezainis. When one eats a pasab b'kistin, there's a shaila if a person eats something which is definitively a pasab b'kistin, meaning it's a pasab b'kistin according to all definitions. It's hard, it's fruit-filled, and it's sweet. Perhaps a apple pie with a hard crust might fit that condition. There are shittas that hold in that case you make a mezainis because there's no suffix that it's bread. It's definitively a pasab b'kistin because it meets all three conditions. Again, one should ask their local rav, that shaila, how they should be noyeg if they eat an apple pie with a hard crust for dessert. I'll take questions.
Okay, we have a question. What is the reason why dessert, for instance ice cream, is not considered part of the meal? On Shabbos in particular, people do expect to see a dessert such as ice cream, parv. In particular for guests, they have no preconceived expectation of mizonos or shahakal for dessert.
So the answer is why? What about ice cream? So the answer is we consider historically dessert is been eaten as a separate entity. Remember, the idea here is there's a term which is used, which I didn't mention in the shir, but to answer this question, I'll mention it. Malafis bayas hapas, which means literally items that are eaten with bread. The reason why you don't have to make a bracha on chicken is because chicken is very often eaten with bread. You make a chicken sandwich and so on. So chicken becomes tuffle to the bread because it could and is very often eaten with bread. Now, even though I'm not eating my chicken with my bread, most people eat the challah. They may even be done with the challah by the time they get to the chicken. But it is dvarim that malafis bayis hapas. It's used. It's eaten together with bread. Now, even kugel, even if a person eats a piece of Yerushalmi kugel, that we say the Gemara tells us hani bavloi tipshai. They would eat the naham ben naham. They would actually take no one puts a piece of Yerushalmi kugel, which is a noodle kugel, on a piece of bread. Those are similar items, and therefore it's not really malafis bayis hapas. But we extend the din of malafis bayis hapas to dvar mabayim machmas hasuda, things that are eaten during the suda, together with the chicken and together with the main course. No one eats bread. No one eats ice cream, typically, not no one, but typically, ice cream is not something that's either malafet as a pas, you don't put ice cream on bread, and it's not dvar mabad machmas hasuda. It's not something that's eaten even together at the time the bread is eaten. Again, the kugel is eaten with the chicken, which is eaten at the time of the bread. It's all part of my meal, and therefore the kugel doesn't need a bracha either. But ice cream is not something that's eaten together with bread. It's relegated to dessert, and for that matter, besides ice cream, dessert is something that's typically was never historically eaten with bread, and therefore the extent of the kayach of the bread to pater terminates with the end of my main course, because that typically is what's defined as a meal. Now nowadays we eat the dessert, but l'maisa that's considered a separate entity. I should mention the Shiva Bruderman Zatzal, Shiva Ner Yisrael, was of the opinion that even desserts do not require a bracha because of this shaila that's being asked, and that is, well, nowadays our styles of how we eat have changed, and therefore we do eat dessert as part of a meal. It's typically, like you say, you're a guest at someone's house on Shabbos, we almost come to expect to have a dessert, and now therefore, what do you mean? My Hamotzi really should be going on that as well. For that reason, Rosh Shiva's psak was desserts do not require a bracha. There are Talmidim of Shiva who do not make a bracha on dessert because they go with the psak, the harav of Berenu, Arvudim is on Tzak Levracha. However, the consensus of most paiskim is not like that. Again, because that's a chiddush within the framework of how Chazal implemented it. In other words, it works into Bisman Hazeh. That's the machlekes here. Rosh Shiva held that now we eat dessert as part of a meal, so it should be incorporated. Whereas the consensus of most paiskim is that afal pikein, how did Chazal establish the kayach of the brocha of Hamotzi? They did not include dessert; it was considered a separate entity, and therefore, even though nowadays you expect it, but l'halacha l'maisa, most opinions hold that desserts do require a independent bracha. Again, unless it's possible kistin, as we spoke out earlier.
Okay, if you eat bread with the dessert, is there still a need for a bracha on the dessert? And if not, then should one do this l'chadchila to avoid the bracha on the dessert?
There are people who do that also. I think the consensus of the paiskim here is that in this case you're machnas yourself into a suffix by doing that, and therefore we're going to come out. Again, there's chilukei deis on this, there's difference of opinion, but we're going to come out that ideally, rather, if you do eat it like that, you're getting yourself into a shaila. Certainly if you took ice cream and spread it on your bread, l'chol deis, you would not need a bracha because it's tuffle. But just to sit there and eat the bread and the ice cream and so on, according to many opinions, you're getting yourself into a suffix bracha. Is that called tuffle? Is it enough for the bread, etc.? And therefore, to avoid that shaila, it's better not to do that, rather to make a bracha on dessert. When your entire meal was the fruit plate, we advise doing that because number one, that's your whole meal, and you're in a suffix situation to start with. You have no way around that. And number two is that in general, there's a strong tzad that you don't need a bracha anyway because it's your main course. So you're just adding the bread at the beginning of the meal, what's called the rafka, the milsa, to make it much stronger as part of the meal. So again, that's why there we do it. But by dessert, it's preferable not to do that, according to the consensus of many paiskim.
Okay, another question. If you eat the fruit before you wash, do you have to make a bracha achrona, or is it included in brachas hamazon?
So the ideal method there is to eat less than a shear. In that case, so what you'll do is you will go over to the little fruit cup and take a little piece of watermelon. Let's say it's a hadama fruit cup. Take a piece of watermelon, make a hadama. Let's say it's a ha'etz fruit cup. You'll take a little piece of apple and eat less than a shear to avoid this issue of whether or not one has to make a bracha achrona. The halachos of when you eat before a meal, whether you need a bracha achrona, are very complicated, and therefore one should avoid that shaila and just eat less than a shear.
Okay. Should you drink a shahakal before the Suda to pater a shahakal for liquids during the Suda?
It's not necessary because we hold that shahakal beverages are considered part of the meal and schnapps is part of the meal, and therefore it's not necessary to do that. It's automatically patered by the Hamotzi. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Shem, in the next shir, which is tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from today, which is the second day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. Again, we will send out a notice if there's any change to that date. We will talk about the brocha of Bar Pri HaGofen and what it has the ability to exempt, as we will see. Just as bread has the ability to exempt other food during the meal, HaGofen has the ability to exempt various beverages, and we'll go through those halachos as well as speak about HaTayv HaMetiv. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Heber. Yasher Koach. I want to thank those who have helped us get this in order. Debbie Rosenstein, Ellie Reidler, Rabbi Chapman. And we look forward to seeing you again. Again, this Wednesday at noon, we have our regular series of webinars, end of the month webinars with Rabbi Kurzfeld, and we'll send you an email about that. Have a great day. Take care.